Hi everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to model this Sneakoscope from the Harry Potter films. I'm going to show you how to create the basic model, how to texture it, and I'm also going to show you a little bit of animation as well as a nice kind of introduction project to Blender. Okay, so to get started, we've opened up our default layout Blender workspace. And you can see we've got the camera, the cube, and the light source. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a selection box all over that and delete it. Okay, we're going to start off with a nice clean page. Now, to start making the Sneakoscope, what I'm actually going to do is bring in some image references so that I can basically model around the existing designs. So I'm going to go online and I'm going to search for Sneakoscope Harry Potter. And let's see what we can find. Let's go for this one. Right click and we'll save that. Any image or PNG will work, sort of JPEG PNG. And to bring this into our workspace, all you need to do is find out where you saved your file to and simply drag the image into the 3D space. Now what you'll notice is if we rotate around, the image is slightly sort of wonky, and that's because it snaps to wherever our camera is positioned. So our camera was positioned roughly about here, so it's facing towards that position. What we want to do is make it nice and flat. For those of you who don't know how to rotate and move around in Blender, I'm simply holding my middle mouse wheel down, or you can use the gyro in the top right hand corner here. So I'm going to delete that image because it's not how I want it to be. And I'm actually going to go over to the gyro here and I'm going to click on either the X or Y. Either one of those will then flatten your workspace. It removes all the perspective from it. So now when I come and drag my image into it, you can see that it's standing up perfectly. Okay, so it's going to be much easier to draw. I'm going to click on the image. I'm going to type S on my keyboard to scale it, and G to grab. I'm going to try and position the middle image roughly where my 3D cursor is, which is the center of my axes there. Might scale it up just a little bit more and grab that. It can help if you snap your view back using the gyro and you can just position it a bit more accurately. There we are. So let's get started modeling this. What I'm going to do is start off with a basic shape, and you want to start off with a basic shape that's closest to the model you're trying to create. So for example, this is basically a sphere that's got a slightly pointed end to it. So I'm going to go to Add in the top left, go to Mesh, and click on UV Sphere. And you can see I get this little sphere pop up there. Actually, I can see that my image has slightly moved off the y-axis here. It'll be really better if it's sort of centered in my image. So there's two things I can do. I can either click on the image, right click, and go to Snap Selection to Cursor, which means this will snap the image to the 3D cursor, which is currently in the center of my screen. And you can see it appears right bang in the center now. Or I can go to the top right where my gyro is, and you can see there's a little arrow barely visible. If I click on that, it opens the transform menu. You see I've got location and I've got some numbers in the X, Y, and Z values. All I'm going to do is set those to 0. And it basically does the same thing, snaps it into the center. So I'm just going to move that down now so I can see what I'm doing. Wonderful. Okay, so let's get this sphere positioned. So I'm going to flatten my view again. So I'm going to type G on my keyboard to grab it. I just want to move it straight up because currently this sphere is right bang in the center. So I'm going to type Z so it locks to the Z axis. I'm going to move it up. I need to make it slightly bigger, so I'm just going to type S to scale it and move it about so. Okie doke. Now the bottom needs to be stretched out a little bit. So again, I'm going to flatten my view. I'm going to go to the top left where it says Object Mode. And I'm going to change that to Edit Mode. I need to start editing the shape now. So I'm going to go into Edit Mode. And I'm going to keep in Vertex Select. You see I've got 3 options: Vertex, Edge, and Face. I'm going to stick with vertex select, but any one of these would actually work. Important thing is I'm going to now select some of the bottom vertices and drag them down to create this more stretched bottom piece. I need to make sure I've got X-ray turned on, which is right in the top right hand corner here, the two squares. If I don't, you can see that I've got the front vertices selected now, but I haven't got the back. Okay, so when I grab that, you can see it's all distorted at the back. So what I need to do, snap my view back to the front, turn on X-ray and reselect those just by dragging a box, and you can see it's selected all of them. Now I can type G, I want to drag them straight down, so I'm going to type Z as well, and I can drag them down. Now, this is not what we want. Can you see how it's basically just stretching those faces? It's not really kind of editing the whole shape. So I'm going to hit escape to undo that. To get this nice consistent curve, I'm going to turn on proportional editing, and you'll find that at the top of your screen, it's this circle that's kind of greyed out and it's got a squiggly line next to it. I'm going to click on it to turn it blue. That means it's activated. Watch what happens now when I type G to grab and Z to go straight down. You can see that proportional editing basically averages the size of the faces and the geometry so that everything kind of stretches with it. And if you've got a mouse, you can use your mouse wheel to make this circle bigger and smaller, which determines how much of the shape is being affected. Okay, so I can make that quite large and sort of drag that all down. We're going to turn off proportional editing because that's all that I need. And I'm just going to go into some of these edges and kind of alter them a little bit so that everything kind of lines up a little better. You see this one just needs to be stretched out. Okie doke. So we've got that, we've got a nice point to it. So now let's create this rim around the center. So I'm going to flatten my image again, just by clicking on the X on the gyro here. And let's start modeling this rim here. Now I'm going to actually pull it out of this sphere. I'm not going to add a new object or anything. I'm just going to pull it out. And I need to add a bit more geometry to this sphere to be able to pull it out at this position here. So I'm going to change to edge select mode in the top left. You could stay with vertex load. I just prefer doing this with edges. It's a little easier to see. And let's start by selecting these ones and just grabbing them up so it's level with the top of that rim. And let's grab these ones as well so they're level with the bottom. And I need to scale those out a bit as well by the looks of it. There we go. Okay, let's add some more geometry into the center that we can grab and pull out and create this rim. And to do that, we're going to go to the loop cut tool, which is on the left-hand side. About halfway down, you can see it's a cube with a line going around the center. When you hover over your object, you can see that a yellow line starts flickering all over the place. And basically that's going to split the model. It's going to add some more geometry to it. And you can just add one line by clicking like that, and you've got a new set of lines. Or you can go to the top left of the screen where it says number of cuts, and you can just increase that. So let's say 10. So then when you click, you get 10 divisions. And it's a really good way of localizing detail. You know, sometimes you need to add a bit more detail, but you don't want to add it all over the place. Loop cuts is one tool that you can use to do that. For this, I'm actually just going to use 2 cuts just to drag it out. So I'm just going to click there. And then what I'm going to do is, really important, go back to your select tool. Otherwise, you'll just keep adding loop cuts with each click. So there's my select tool. With those 2 loop cuts, I'm going to type S on my keyboard and I'm going to scale those out like so. And I reckon I'm going to add a bit more detail as well. So I'm going to go back to loop cut. I'm going to bring the number of cuts down to 1. I'm just going to add 1 on the top and the bottom. And scale those out ever so slightly. Like so. In fact, I might move that one up a little bit, and I might do the same with this one as well. There we go. Now, I've actually got another little sort of trim at the bottom here. So I'm going to grab this. No, I'm not. I'm actually going to grab this one. So I'm going to select these lines, scale them out like so. Going to add a loop cut for the bottom of that rim, and I'm just going to add one to create a kind of curve. I'm going to type S to scale, and I think that'll do me for now. So let's turn off X-ray in the top right, and let's zoom out. So you see the rim that we've made there. I need to go back to select. Now, it's a little bit blocky. If I actually go back to object mode, we can see all the faces. It's a bit too blocky, you know. I don't need to add that much detail, but I'd like it a little bit smoother. So what I'm going to do, on the right hand side, you see we've got this long list of colourful icons. And the middle one with the blue spanner, that's your modifiers panel. I'm going to click on that, go to add modifier, and in the second column, almost all the way at the bottom, there's subdivision surface. And when I click on that, you can see my model becomes a little bit more detailed, a little bit smoother, especially on these rims here. It's a little bit nicer to see. However, subdivision surface kind of like averages out all the geometry, it smooths it. So any sharp creases you've got or some shapes will kind of be smoothed out and you'll lose the detail. So I'm going to jump back into edit mode. I'm going to snap my camera view to the front and I'm going to turn on X-ray. And what you might be able to see, these black lines are the original geometry before we smoothed it. And you can see a greyed out version of the model that is the smoothed out version. So you can see where some of the details being lost. I had a nice sharp crease here that subdivision has basically kind of created a corner for and smoothed it all out. How do you bring those back? I'm going to go to edge select and I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard so that when I click, it actually selects all the lines in that loop basically. And what I'm going to do, in the transform box, you see we've got an option that says mean crease and currently it's set to 0. I'm going to change that to 1 and watch what happens to this kind of greyed out corner here when I type that. So I'm going to type 1 and hit enter. That smoothed corner disappears, and if we jump to object mode and turn off X-ray, you can see what's happened. My model's still smooth, but it's brought back that crease where I've entered that value into. So if we look at the bottom, we'll do that again. We'll go back to edit mode, turn on X-ray, snap our view to the front, and I want a nice crease here, so I'm going to hold Alt and click and change it to 1 and hit enter. I'm going to do it for the bottom as well. 1 and enter. Go back to object mode, turn off X-ray, and there we go. We've got a bit more kind of sharpness coming back. And I might need to actually move these around a little bit more. So let's go back to edit, X-ray, snap to the front, and let's kind of bring this geometry in a little bit. Actually, no, not bring it out. So let's scale that. Let's bring this one. Let's grab this and bring it down a little bit because it'll create more of a pronounced kind of edge. Whoops. This needs to stick out a bit more. You see where the subdivisions happen. It's kind of brought the rim in a little bit to smooth it off. So you may need to do this a couple of times just to get all your properties back to how they were. Let's do that. So I'm just holding down Alt to select all these edges and hitting scale. That's all I'm doing. And I might just grab this down a little bit. Grab it on the Z. There we go. Let's see what we get with that. Okay, I'm happy with that. I think that works quite well. This doesn't need to be any more detailed. This is quite smooth. If you 3D printed this, it wouldn't be too bad. Now, if you want this to be visually smoother, don't keep subdividing. The more you subdivide, the slower your computer will get because you're adding more and more detail, you're adding more and more polygons. Instead, just right click and go to shade smooth, and you can see that it smooths all that geometry out. Some of the smoothing can be a little odd. You can see on the bottom here, the lighting's kind of a bit strange. To fix this, in that row of icons, column of icons, sorry, on the right hand side, you'll see there's a green triangle. That's your object data properties. This is actually quite useful when it comes to animating. If you click on that, you get a few different options. You want to go to normals, and where it says auto smooth, just tick that box, and you'll probably see all the smoothing go to how it should be. The degrees here, just drag that up and down and it'll smooth it more or less depending on what you want. I'm quite happy with that. So there's a couple more things we need to edit. We need to make the bottom a little bit more pointy. So back to edit, back to our X-ray view and snap it to the front. And let's start kind of playing around with this. Let's select all of these. Grab on the Z axis, let's scale them down a little bit. Let's add 2 loop cuts in. Let's select these, scale it in. And let's grab this on the Z and scale it in. And then let's select all of these ones, give it a mean crease of 1. There we go. Let's see how that looks. And that's just our smoothing, so we need to bring that down. There we go. Okie doke, fantastic. I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave that there. So, in the Sneakoscope, there's actually an interior bit, and currently the glass dome that I've got is hiding that. So what I need to do is separate the glass dome from the main body of the Sneakoscope. And to do that, I'm going to go to edit mode, snap my view to the front, turn on X-ray, and I'm going to select all the faces for that dome. So I'm going to go to face select, I'm going to drag a big box over all those faces, and then I'm going to type P, which will bring up the separate menu, and I want to click on the first option where it says selection. I'm going to separate everything I've just selected. Click on that. You see everything greys out. Let's jump back to object mode. Turn off X-ray. And I can now click on this dome and just G to grab, and I can move it away. So you can see there that the model's been separated completely. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to move that out of the way. I'm going to type G, Y to move it along the Y axis. I'm just going to type in a number I can easily remember, so 5, something like that. I'm just typing that so I can snap it back in easily once I'm done. So let's start modelling the centre. So let's click on the main body here, go back to edit mode, snap my view to the front, turn on X-ray, and let's go to edge select and select this top edge here. And let's start modelling this kind of curved, domed inner bit. So to drag out these lines and to create more geometry, I'm just going to type E. And you see that extrudes those lines, and I can start shaping the interior here. I'm going to type Z so I grab them and they go straight up. So this will keep everything symmetrical. I'm going to go about a third of the way up. I'm just going to type S to scale. I'm going to start following those lines. Before I continue though, you see that my line is pink, and that means it's got the crease still enabled. You see these lines that are all pink? That's where we entered our mean crease to bring back the detail. I'm basically extruding from one of those lines, so each line I now create is going to be pink and have that crease. So I just need to type 0, enter, that disappears, and now I can type E and keep going. So E to extrude, Z to go straight up, S to scale. E to extrude, Z to go straight up, S to scale. When it comes to the top, I'm just going to zoom back over and type E and then S straight away, just to create a bit of a ridge. Then you're going to snap back to the front, E to extrude, Z, and I'm going to go straight down. And you can see it gets a little confusing, but you can see the lines that I'm making. And I'm kind of going to guess at this point because there's clearly some sort of channel there for the ball to kind of spin round. E, Z, S to scale, and then E, S, and then E, Z to move up a bit, snap to the front, S to scale, move that quite a way in, E to extrude, Z to go straight up, S to scale, E to extrude, Z to go straight up, S to scale, and then the same thing again. And to make all the points meet in the middle, if I turn off X-ray, you see that we've still got a hole in the center. I'm just going to type S to scale. I'm going to type 0 on my keyboard, and all the points will join together. Okie doke. So there we have it. And I've created quite a sharp point there. So what I might actually do is undo that. So that's Control Z if you're on Windows, Command Z if you're on a Mac. Might do S to scale and bring them almost all the way in. And then actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type F on my keyboard, which creates a face. And you can see that's smoothed out a little bit more. Okay, let's go to object mode and see what we've got. I think I'm pretty happy with that. Apart from this edge here, it could do with smoothing out a bit more. So I'm going to go back to edit mode. I'm going to go to edge select, Alt to select all these lines. Let's turn on X-ray and scale those in a bit more. Let's maybe select all these ones as well. Grab them on the Z, scale them in a bit. And hopefully that's made a little bit more of a curved surface. Yes, I just need to change my auto smooth, increase it. There we go. So I need to increase my smooth to smooth all that off, but then it takes away the detail from the bottom here. So I'm going to increase that angle. So I'm going to turn on X-ray and snap to the front. Whoops. Ooh, we're going all over the place. There we go. And let's increase this angle by selecting all of those and scaling them in a bit. Let's grab these, scale, grab on the Z. Let's see, has that brought it back? Yes, it has. There's the sharpness there. Okay, let's add the ball in the center. Pretty easy one this. Go to Add, Mesh, UV Sphere. Let's go to the Modifiers panel and subdivide it so we make it a bit more detailed. And then let's grab it on the Z, scale it down. Let's snap our view to the front, grab it, scale. That looks about right. Literally just throwing it in. Let's grab it on the Y, so that's G and then Y. And there we go. Right click, shade smooth. So there's the ball for the center there. Right, so we've got everything. We've modelled the base, we've modelled the ball that spins round, and we've modelled the glass. Next thing I'm going to do, just before we move on to texturing, is I'm just going to go underneath this glass dome here, and you can see that there's no thickness to it. We've just made a face. I want to give it a little bit of thickness so the glass looks a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to click on that dome, add a modifier, and I'm going to add the solidify modifier. And when I click on that, you can see now we've got a bit of thickness to that dome. To change that thickness, you can see we've got a slider here. I'm just going to click and drag. I'm just going to increase that ever so slightly, not too much. And then I can click on my dome, type G on my keyboard, Y to move it along the Y-axis. I'm going to type -5 to move it back into position. And there we are. There's our Sneakoscope modelled. So let's now dive into rendering. To start rendering, what I'm going to do is first delete the image. I've got all I need from that. I'm going to kind of texture it however I want now. Let's first type Z on our keyboard and go to rendered view. The reason we're doing that is we can see light sources and we can see the textures. Now currently we've got no textures applied, and remember we deleted the light right at the start. Now if you want to bring in physical lights and light your model that way, just go to add, light, and add whichever light type that you want. Personally, I like to use HDRs to bring in a backdrop and a light source. So to do that, I'm going to go over to my World Properties menu, go to where it says Colour with the yellow dot, and go to Environment Texture, and I'm going to open a HDR. I've got a video separately on how to bring in HDRs to Blender. It's a quick 5 minutes, I think. So if you want to look at that in more depth, feel free to look at that video. I'm going to very quickly jump in and find a HDR file to use. You can see here I've got this nice kind of photo shoot, nice kind of average lighting here, smooth lighting, sorry, and that's enough to get me started. So let's create a glass texture for the dome, nice and easy. I'm going to click on the dome, and you can see at the bottom of my screen I've got this timeline. You can actually drag it up. Now you've got a timeline by default. You can actually turn this menu into anything. There's a little clock icon on the left hand side here. If I click on that, here are all the other options you have for this workspace. And I'm going to go to Shader Editor. This is how we're going to texture. I'm going to add new to bring in a new texture. And you can see that we get 2 blocks appear automatically. We drag this up and zoom in a little bit. You see that one's called Principled BSDF and the other's called Material Output. Effectively, this BSDF box allows us to create basically any texture that we want. The Material Output is basically all the settings we create mixed all together and turned into the texture. You may have seen these kinds of things, big trees, hundreds of different blocks. Basically, the best thing about this is you can create any texture. You can create something incredibly simple or the most advanced thing you can imagine. So, what we're actually going to do is I'm going to delete the BSDF because I'm going to turn this into a glass texture, and glass has its own BSDF node. To bring that in, I'm going to go to Add at the top of the screen here. I'm just going to click on Search and type in glass, and you can see there's glass BSDF. When you click, you get that node appear, and all I'm going to do is drag the BSDF to surface, and you can see automatically there's my glass texture. It's not transparent in this view, so currently we're just in rendered view, and if you want to see what render engine you're using, go to this icon on the right hand side. It's the back of a camera, and the very first thing you see, render engine, and currently we're in Eevee. The most realistic rendering you can get is in cycles, but we're going to do that right at the very end because it's quite taxing on our computer. But that's good enough for now. We can see what kind of texture we've got. Let's dive in and add the textures to the bottom. Now, on this main bit of the bottom here, I want to have some graphics, some nice colours going on. For the rim and the pivot, I want a metal texture. So I'm actually going to separate these a little bit further. We separated the glass at the start. I'm going to separate this bottom bit. So let's go to Edit Mode, snap to the front, turn on X-ray, and go to Face Select. I'm going to select the very top here. In fact, I need to select the whole thing, don't I? Because I need to make this whole interior metallic as well. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to hide the glass dome. Just go into the Layers panel here and clicking on the eye icon to hide it. There we go. Okay, now let's select the whole of this top bit here. There we go. And I'm going to type P on my keyboard, separate by selection. And that's now a new object. I'm going to go to the bottom, snap my view back to the front, select all of this bottom little pivot bit, P on my keyboard, and selection. There we go. Let's go back to object mode, and you can see that all of this is now separated, which means it's going to make it easier to texture. Everything's separated. Okay, let's add some metallic texture to this. And you can just download a JPEG and apply that to your model. Really, if we're using Blender, let's use it to the max. Let's use a PBR texture. And if you've ever downloaded a PBR texture, you'll know, because when you've opened the folder, you'll have like about 7 or 8 different images. Some are black and white, some are blue, some are the actual colour of the material. It's a little bit confusing. Hopefully this is going to simplify it for you. So let's drag this up, our texture window. Let's add a new texture, and we're going to keep everything this time. We're going to keep principled BSDF, and we're going to keep material output. Let's download a texture. So let's go online, and there's loads of sites you can download textures from. One of my favourites is one called Polygon with 2 eyes. And if I go to textures, you can see we've got a huge library of these photorealistic textures that you can download. Some of them you have to pay for, some of them are free, and we're going to use a free one today. So let's go to free on the left here, and we're going to go to metal. You see all these textures we can download for free. So I'm actually going to use this first one here, this metal spotty discoloration texture. If I click on it, you can see here we've got maps and all these different options. These are all the different layers we're going to put into Blender. Each layer brings something different. One layer might make the material more reflective. One might make it look more metallic. One may make it more glossy. All these different things. Some of these layers, particularly the displacement layer, will add 3D data to it. So instead of having to sculpt loads of bricks, for example, a displacement map will make each brick 3-dimensional, and it's a great way of saving your file size. So to download this, I'm going to change the specular workflow to metalness. Makes sense as we're working with a metallic texture. And I'm not going to download it because I actually already have. You would go and click on Get Started and download that. So back into Blender, I'm going to open up that texture that I've downloaded. In this case, I put it in my assets folder. PBR, spotty texture, metallic. And keep opening it up until you get to this area here where you've got all these maps, okay? Some of them look quite flunky. You can see these. This one's a bright blue one, but it will be very useful to you. If you hover over, you can see that actually, if you kind of work through the names, we've got a colour map, we've got a displacement map, metalness map, normal, and we've got roughness. You don't have to use them all, so if there's some of them that you don't understand, don't bother. We're going to start with the colour map, because that's our JPEG. That's the thing we'd normally just slap on. I'm just going to drag it into my texture window. And straight away, where it says colour, and I've got the yellow dot, I'm going to click and drag a line to the base colour. And you'll see that the texture is a little bit distorted. It's not quite how I want to look, but at the moment we're just going to get all these maps in here. We'll worry about this later. Okay, so let's drag that to the side. Now let's go and bring in the metalness map. And we're going to click on colour, drag a line out, and funnily enough, we're going to hook it up to the metallic data. And you can see it looks slightly more metallic now. So it's starting to layer all these textures up. Let's go back into our window and let's bring in the roughness map. And let's click and drag that to the roughness data. And you can see now that's made a big difference. Look how shiny that is now. Okay, so they're really starting to have an effect. And finally, we're going to bring in the normal map. The normal map basically creates a little bit of 3D data by adding in light and shadow. So all these little indents and imperfections, they'll have a little bit of a highlight, a little bit of a shadow to make it look 3D. That's what the normal map's doing. Now, we can't just hook the normal map to the normal icon on the principled BSDF. We have to add one more thing. It's quite simple. Just go to Add, click on Search, type in normal, and we want normal map. And it's basically a middleman. It helps process the normal data. So we're going to hook colour to colour and normal to normal. And there we go. Okay, so although at first it can look quite complicated, hopefully now that's shown you it's actually quite simple and straightforward once you get stuck in. These maps can become very, very complicated, but just add what you need and sort of build up the knowledge as you go along. Right, it's not quite looking how we want it to, and that's because we haven't UV unwrapped our model. At primary school, I'm sure many of you will have created a net of an object and then glued it together to create a 3D cube or a cone or something like that. We're basically going to do the opposite. We've got our 3D object and we're going to flatten it. We're going to create a net. And to do that, we need to go right to the top of our screen and you can see all these workspaces. We're going to go to UV editing and it opens up this kind of graphed area here. You'll lose your rendered view, don't worry, just type Z on your keyboard and click on rendered to bring that back. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to type A on my keyboard and that's going to select all of the geometry I've got here on the right hand side. And if I zoom out, you can see here I've got some geometry already. The reason that this is looking glitchy is because currently our net is in a straight line. It isn't really what we've got on the right hand side, and this will make a bit more sense in a second. Go to UV at the top of your 3D window and click on Unwrap. And you can see now our net's changed, it's circular. It looks a lot more like what we've got modelled on the right hand side. And if you can see, we haven't got that glitchy material anymore. What's really useful about this window, if I type A to select all of this, let's type S to scale. And you should be able to see on the right hand side, my texture is now getting smaller. Or bigger, depending on how I move this. I can type G to move it around. You can do all sorts of things. Okay, but there's my texture. Let's go back to layout view. We're done with that for now. So let's go back to layout at the top. You see my texture's looking much, much better. It's a little too shiny for me. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete the roughness map, which is this one here. I'm just going to click on it and delete it. All that shine goes away. Instead, I'm just going to use the slider. I'm going to drag that down. You see, if I drag it all the way down, it's really shiny. I'm just going to drag it a little bit up to take a bit of that shine away. Okay, there we go. I might also add a clear coat, which is a bit of a gloss. So I'm just going to drag that slider up. Lovely, I'm quite happy with that for now. Right, let's add that same texture to the pivot. And don't worry, because when you click on the pivot, you don't have to add in all those maps again and add in all those settings. If you click on the little sphere next to new, you can see your materials have been saved. So if I click on material 2, which is the recent one, it applies it straight away. It's glitched out, so I'm going to go back to UV editing. I'm going to type A to select everything in my 3D window, go to UV and unwrap, and then everything's fixed. Back to layout view. Okay. So there we go. Now let's change the colour of the ball in the centre here. And what I'm going to do is add a new texture. But instead of bringing any maps, I'm just going to go to base colour, click on the white box and change it to a blue. And let's bring down the roughness to make it nice and shiny. Job done. Nice and simple on that one. Let's go to the main body, click on that, and let's bring in a texture. So go to Google, go to the images and look for any kind of pattern or image or texture that you want. Just a JPEG, we're not going to use maps for this. So I'm going to click Add New. And I've downloaded a texture already. I've downloaded this kind of groovy bit of wallpaper. I'm just going to click and drag that in. And same thing as before, just drag colour to base colour. And there's my texture applied. I want to change the size of it and move it around. So I'm going to go to UV editing, type A on my keyboard, UV, unwrap, type A in the UV window and S to scale. G to grab. I'm just going to kind of move that around. In fact, that'll do. I'm quite happy with that. Go back to layout, and I want to give it a little bit of a shine, not too shiny like the silver trim there. So I'm going to go to roughness and bring it down just a little bit. I'm going to add a clear coat, a bit of a gloss. And there we are. I'm happy with that for now. I can see that I've got a bit of a ridge here on the bottom of my of the trim here. So I'm going to go to edit mode, snap it to the front. I'm going to try and smooth that out if I can very quickly. Drag that box along. There we go. Whoops. S to scale. And let's try and see if that's made much of a difference. It's got rid of one of them. That'll do. That'll do for now. Okie doke. So let's drag this window down. We're done with that for now. Type Alt-H on your keyboard to unhide. Remember, we hid the glass top. And I said before that Eevee gives us quite a good rendering preview, but Cycles is the more realistic one. Let's jump into Cycles now. So we go to the right hand side where it says Eevee, click on that, and now let's click on Cycles. There we go. Hopefully you can see the massive difference that's made. You know, we've got much more realistic reflections, more realistic highlights. The glass is suddenly transparent and looks exactly how it should. And you can even see our environment being reflected there. Okay, so much, much better, much nicer. I'm going to snap back to Eevee because now I'm going to set up a scene. So I'm going to go to Add, Mesh, and I'm going to add a plane. I'm going to zoom out and scale it. And I'm actually going to go to the end here. Let's go to Edit Mode, grab that edge, and type E to extrude, and Z to go straight up. There we go. So we've got a bit of a background here. I'm also going to snap my view to the front, and I'm going to select all the objects in my layers panel just by holding shift and selecting all these objects. I'm going to grab on the Z and move them down. I'm also going to rotate on the Y to give it a bit of an angle. Grab it on the Z and move it straight down. And there we go. Right, let's try animating this. We've made our object. This spins normally, and it's really, really easy to animate this. First thing we need to do before we start animating is just to parent all our objects together. We've split our Sneakoscope into 5 pieces. And what we need to do is now join them back together without kind of like gluing them. It's just a reference. So for example, if I clicked on this pivot point here and animated it to spin, only that bit would spin, nothing else would, because it's all separated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically hold down Shift and select all the parts of my model, including the sphere, and because that's hidden, I'm actually going to use the layers to do it. And make sure that your reference point, so this spins on the pivot, so that's my reference point, is the last thing you select. Because I'm going to type Control P, and I'm going to parent all the other objects in my Sneakoscope to that pivot point, and because the pivot is the last thing I selected, that becomes the parent. And I'm going to click on Object Keep Transform because everything's tilted, everything's scaled differently. I want to keep all those transformations. You can see, if it's worked, that all my objects now appear as one in my Layers panel. You can test that it's worked as well. If I click on the pivot and I type G to grab, everything else should now move with it. So now we can get to animating. So let's drag our bottom work surface up, and currently it's got all our textures in. And let's go to the left hand icon and change it back to timeline. Okay. And then in our layers panel, we can select all our objects. And I'm going to type I on my keyboard. I'm going to go down to location, rotation, and scale. Basically, that's inserting a keyframe telling Blender that at the start of my animation, this is how I want everything to be. This is how I want it to set up. So I'm going to click on that. That's all keyframed, and you can see I've got an orange diamond appear at the start. I'm going to drag my blue slider along. I'm going to drag it to about 60. In my 3D window, I'm going to type R, and that's going to allow me to rotate my object. I want it to spin, so I want it to spin on the surface, which means I now need to type Z. And you can see my object spins. I'm going to type 360, so it spins a complete 360, and it'll allow me to loop the animation. I'm going to hit enter, type I, and add location, rotation, and scale. And if I move back to the start and press play, you can see my object now spins. You can see that it was quite slow at the start, and it also slows down towards the end. So if I'm looping this, it's going to look a little odd. So if I right click on my keyframe, I can go to interpolation mode, and I'm going to click on linear. I'm going to do it for the end one as well. And that now keeps the speed constant. To make this loop, well, I'm only using 60 keyframes. At the top here, you can see the start frame and the end frame. Currently, the end frame is 250. If I click on that and change it to 60 and hit enter, I can now play my animation and it will just loop. Okay, so a really nice, easy animation we can apply to our model. Let's put that back to the start. And let's actually just see what kind of render we've got here. So let's zoom in on our model. Let's create a bit more of a box here. So let's go to edit mode, grab the edge here, E, Z, and just drag that up. Go back to object mode, and let's see what this looks like in cycles. Lovely stuff. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. So let's go back to Eevee. One thing you'll notice is to actually get a rendered image of this, a JPEG that you can put into your portfolio. To do that, we would need to go to render at the top left here. And if you click on render image, nothing will happen. We need a camera, and we deleted that at the start. So what I'm going to do is going to go to add, camera, and it adds a camera into our scene. You can see it's right at the bottom here. And it can be a little awkward to manipulate. One of the easiest ways of positioning your camera is actually just move your viewport until you're happy with what you can see. So let's say that. And then type Control, Alt, and 0 on your keyboard, and it will snap the camera to where your viewfinder is. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, like so. And do the same thing, Control Alt 0, and now everything fits in. So I'm happy with that now. Now when I go to render, and I render the image, you can see that everything's contained and I get an actual image. Remember, I'm in Eevee, so it's rendered with the Eevee engine. I'm going to close that, go back to cycles, click on render, render the image, and that's us done, okay? It's just going to take a little bit of time to compute, and now you can see the process is starting. So there we are. A bit of a longer video than I normally do, but hopefully that served as, for many of you, as a nice introduction to Blender. It shows you how to model, how to add texture, how to render it, and also a little bit of an introduction to animating as well. So, great little starter project, and I hope you have fun with that.